This is ZEISS Presents Full Exposure, the weekly resource for news, trends, and the people who influence the world of photography and cinematography. Hosted by veteran photographer and filmmaker Jim Camp.
Boston-based photojournalist and filmmaker Lauren Owens Lambert documents her passion, the human aspect of conservation and climate change research. Her work focuses on people as a vital part of natural cycles, a perspective that is sometimes lost in contemporary views on climate. Her work is seen widely in photographic and conservation publications. Lauren partners with groups such as the Nature Conservancy and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. She has exhibited at Photoville in New York and has presented her work at the United Nations for the Ocean Data Alliance. Hey, Lauren. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. God, your work is so moving and expansive on the topic of environmentalism, and we haven't really had anybody who's a photographer and a visual journalist that's in that field. So let's talk a bit about your story on endangered species of the Maine, the Gulf of Maine, and the sea turtles.
Mm-hmm. So this is a story I've been kind of working on for a couple seasons, and it's this weird natural phenomenon that happens, on Cape Cod, where these tropical endangered sea turtles who come up in the summertime, and they kind of feed, because Cape Cod's pretty, calm waters. It's warm. There's a lot of eelgrass and different seaweeds that they can munch on, and jellies and stuff. But then the winter comes in. It comes in pretty hard and pretty fast, and the temperatures of the ocean drops very drastically. So the turtles, sometimes they can get lost, in the hook-like shape of the Cape, and then they get hypothermic, and they start to die, out in the water, and they become little buoys, and then the winds and the ocean pushes them ashore. So, every high tide, volunteers all throughout the Cape who are associated with Mass Audubon go out and they collect these sea turtles on the beaches. They call the Wellfleet system, or the Wellfleet Audubon facility, and they bring the turtles there where, again, some biological data is recorded. They give them tags, put them in little banana boxes with towels, put them in a room that's slightly warmer but not too warm because you don't want to shock their system. And then they get shipped up to Quincy at the New England Aquarium's facility, where they have a turtle rehabilitation center. And it's actually the first and oldest of its kind in America.
Wow.
Yeah. So then they are kind of brought back, hopefully. Some of them come in with broken shells or broken flippers and hypothermia, and they have to be treated for all of this. And then they are flown by volunteer pilots, which I think is awesome. They're packed up in these small little planes, and then they're flown to the Gulf to be released into warm waters. Wow. And then kind of the cycle starts all over again.
Wow. Now, do they when they're in at the Cape in the summer, are they nesting? Are they laying eggs?
No, it's usually it's for the Kemp's Ridley, which is most of what is found, and they're the most endangered sea turtle in the world, and they're the ones that wash up most often. It's a lifestyle stop for them, so it's a life cycle. So they come up for I think it's between the ages of 1 and 3 or so, and each summer they come up to basically just sort of feed. It's almost like Cape Cod serves as a nursery for them, so they're not nesting or breeding. They're just sort of growing and becoming a little bit more mature. And then they'll go back to the Gulf of Mexico, where there's a handful of beaches that they nest on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, and this is a crew at the Wellfleet Audubon Center with a biomark machine. So they're scanning this hypothermic turtle to see if it's been caught before, if it's been chipped or tagged, things like that. So it's very cool because most of them, are volunteers, and it's a lot of citizen scientists who go out and dedicate their time to save these turtles.
Where are you now in this project?
Well, I've been able to focus locally on it. I would like to go into the New England Aquarium's Rehabilitation Center. I did that the first time around. I'd like to go in. There's a few more images that I want to get. So I'd like to go back in there to document that process a little bit better. And then I'd really like to get on one of the planes for the volunteer pilots and go down and photograph one of the releases. It would be great to expand that a little bit farther and even go to their nesting sites to photograph kind of where they're nesting, because there's a whole other story there about turtle egg poaching.
Yes.
And there's this new technology where they're putting in like robot eggs to kind of track the poachers and like the journey of the eggs once they're taken. So that's kind of an interesting story as well. So I'd love to expand this into telling a little bit more of not just the Cape part of it, but you know, all the other kind of things that the species.
Why
has
are
to
they
go
poached?
through. For food. They eat them. Yeah, they sell them and eat them. Yeah.
Wow. That's horrible.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like a traditional food for them, or I'd have to look into that.
But where are you talking about now?
Mexico. Yeah.
Strictly Mexico, but about Florida? Are they in?
No, they only they only nest, or at least the Kemp's Ridley only nests on a handful of beaches on the north, south, east side of Mexico, and there's one beach in Texas that they nest on.
Oh.
Yeah.
So is the Texas beach, from what you've heard, more of a safe haven for them?
Yeah, they're pretty protected. Poaching still happens, you know, but they're pretty protected there. And they're protected on all the other beaches too. It's just whether or not it's enforced as, you know, as it needs to be or not. So yeah, this is a little turtle that after it was found, they put him in a box to kind of, the lady who found the turtle was off to go grab her car to come back and scoop him up. So I kind of hung out with the turtle.
That's cool. So now on to the other part of this. This story has two parts. The salmon.
Yeah. So the Atlantic salmon is interesting, and I'm at the early stages of you know, documenting this. I'd really like to expand it into a video, but this is an interesting case because the Atlantic salmon are a highly endangered species throughout New England, and they're actually extinct in all of the southern New England states. So the only place that they're left, the wild native populations of Atlantic salmon, are left in only about 8 rivers in Maine. So, you know, documenting the habitat restoration that's involved with the conservation efforts of the species, also the aquaculture farming techniques that are done with Atlantic salmon, because every Atlantic salmon that you see on your plate is farm raised in Canada or out on the coast of Norway, because we don't have, you know, any wild populations left. So the fishery's been closed for quite some time, and I just think it's really interesting that, you know, we're kind of eating this endangered species, and a lot of people don't know about that, you know. So I just sort of want to bring attention to the state of the salmon. They might not be around for much longer. Maybe we can save them, but honestly, their numbers are so small that we might not be able to. So I think documenting them could be one of our last opportunities to kind of document this wild native species of fish. And then focusing on dam removal and restoration efforts not only helps the Atlantic salmon, but of course, every other sea-run species, including the eel and, you know, herrings and those kind of things. So it can do good to kind of bring to light the restoration that's involved.
Talk a little bit about that, about the habitat restoration.
Well, I mean, New England being one of the first colonized places in the nation, we have some of the most dams, you know, throughout our region. So mills, paper mills, you know, our waterways are extremely clogged with all of these blockages. So, you know, as a direct effect over, you know, a few hundred years, our native sea-run species have been struggling, you know, to kind of get upstream and reproduce. So, you know, removing these dams, a lot of them are not used anymore. They're crumbling. They can even cause harm to downstream communities. Like if one breaches, communities can flood without warning. So there's a lot of negative kind of effects of these dams. And when they're not serving a purpose for clean energy, because some dams are great, you know, like it's a really good source of clean energy depending on where it is and what's at stake here. But when you have all of these kind of decrepit, crumbling, you know, dams and construction pieces that are blocking the way, you might as well take them down. So, and that has a lot to do with like education, because they create ponds and then people get really used to looking out and seeing a pond in their neighborhood. But it's not kind of the natural processes that would be there if the dam was removed, you know? So I think it's a little bit about education of, you know, going from a pond to a river for people who are used to that type of environment, but also supporting the species that need that environment to reproduce. And therefore having a trickle-down effect into the fisheries in the Gulf, because things like herring and all that, they're bait fish. So without a strong amount of bait fish, you know, you're going to have a weak fisheries. So it's kind of a good win-win all around is dam removal and riverway reconstruction.
What stage is that process in of the dam removal?
Of the story, or like
the actual habitat restoration and the dam removal and the story?
Right. Well, I mean, the dam removal it's all site specific. So there's plenty of projects all throughout New England that are at various different stages. So I did a dam video, and that one is on the Third Herring Brook, 3 dams and like a fish passage that they're trying to get on this one brook. Either way, they've done 2 out of the 3, and they're working with the company to kind of get the 3rd one moving as well. So I think that answered your question. I'm not sure. They're kind of all throughout all different variations.
When you are talking about a project like that, mm-hmm. do you sort of base, because I know we talked earlier before we came on just about how do you know when a project is done? You know, I mean, for documentary photographers in general, right, they're never kind of done. But in specific cases like this where there's habitat restoration and so forth, or the turtle story where you know there's certain things you haven't covered. Mm-hmm. Some things are really concrete that you know that you haven't gotten yet, that you know will help fill out the story. But in a case like the salmon story, it's in its early stages, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you plan out your coverage for it? Right.
Well, I've been working with some of the photos earlier were the Downy Salmon Federation, and they have a hatchery. So there's kind of multi-tiers to it, and I'd like to go in and document like the hatchery process and how restoring populations can help that way with the hatchery programs. And then there's also the aquaculture development. I know Maine has 2 companies right now that are developing facilities for the first time in Maine, because all of our aquaculture has been in Canada or Norway for Atlantic salmon. So we're getting some of our first aquaculture facilities in Maine, and I'd love to jump on board with them and kind of document their process and what it's like. Like how do you start an aquaculture facility? What does it look like? I know that the state, I believe it's the fisheries management, the state is doing a lot of research about the genetics of Atlantic salmon, and how do we genetically make a fish that can really succeed in that type of environment, especially if you're going to be doing it on land, which is environmentally the best way to do it. It has the least amount of impact on the ocean and on the environment there, but it's very expensive, and that comes with its own pros and cons. So I'd be really interested to look into that process about how do we raise Atlantic salmon in the state? What does it look like? And then there's the supporting of the native wild species, which is a lot of habitat restoration. So I know the Nature Conservancy is taking down a lot of dams. I think they have one project right now that is going to be in demolition this summer. So documenting that whole process about, you know, how do you take down a dam and what does that look like? Then kind of following up on the restoration afterwards.
Well, speaking of which, you're working on a video project on that, or is it complete?
Yes. No. That the salmon kind of that one is just starting. So I am looking for partnership and support to kind of produce a video about the habitat restoration, aquaculture development, and the overall state of the salmon.
Okay, and we have a little clip from that. We'll see.
Yeah, and that one is on the dam videos that I did for the South Shore. So that's kind of almost like a pilot, or like a, you know,
proof of concept.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
pilgrims, when they first came to Massachusetts, called it the paradise of all these parts because of the amazing fisheries that were here of river herring, cod, all sorts of natural bounty. And I think that Massachusetts can kind of do a lot of good for itself by getting rid of some of these old dams to try and boost the system, because you can reduce fishing quotas, so you can tell fishermen you should fish less, or you can increase the kind of bait fish that are going into the system through some of these measures. So for me, in a world where you don't have many kind of win-win scenarios, this is a big win-win scenario Massachusetts has.
So you've got this video on the habitat restoration, which is great, but it kind of leads me to say, how do you get funding for these projects?
The age-old question that I'm still figuring out.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. No, that's very difficult. I was very fortunate for the short video that I got to produce for the North and South River Watershed Association. They're a South Shore, Massachusetts-based environmental nonprofit, and they got funding from the state. So those little license plates that have like the fish or the lighthouse or whatever, that funding or part of it went towards my video. So that was really important and very helpful. And it's so in this particular case, the organization and the state directly backed me to do this video. Future for like to take this video and make it more powerful and kind of go into the Atlantic salmon and go into what's happening up in Maine, and kind of produce a very similar but different video. I'm currently talking with the Nature Conservancy, and I'd like to begin conversations with like the Atlantic Salmon Federation and maybe the Downey Salmon groups, and just sort of start collecting. I also really want to talk with the Native American populations up there and kind of hear their voice. I spent a lot of time out in Washington State, and the Native peoples out there have a really loud and important voice, and I've been struggling to kind of hear it out here. So I'm really curious to kind of talk with them about what kind of efforts they're making and how they're involved with these habitat restoration projects. So that's my goal, but I'm at the early stages, so kind of putting together those relationships now.
Well, I mean, it sounds fascinating. It sounds like such an important project. I wish you a lot of luck with it. I'd like you to possibly come back when it's in a more fuller stage so we can talk specifically about that, because it sounds like it's got a lot of tentacles and can have a wide-ranging reach. And
thank you. Yeah,
so would love to have you back to talk about that.
Cool. I will be here.
Thanks. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. No problem.
Hi, I'm Tony from ZEISS with today's Lens Close-Up. Today it's the Bodice 40mm close focus lens for Sony Alpha series cameras. This is a fantastic lens, great for your kit. It's a nice all-rounder. It's close focus with the ability of being as close as 9 inches to your subject matter. It's also terrific when you're out on the street. It'll give you a natural look to your photography, and it also has a super fast autofocus, great for keeping up with Sony burst mode. It's also terrific if you're out there taking landscape photography as well, as you're going to get that fantastic ZEISS look. It's the Bodice Close Focus 40mm lens from ZEISS, and that's today's Lens Close-Up.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time for another edition of ZEISS Full Exposure. If you can't watch, you can always catch the audio-only version on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at ZEISS_full exposure or on the web at ZEISSfullexposure.com. And to learn more about the latest in ZEISS lenses, head to ZEISS.com.